All right. So before we get started, let me just say a little bit about me. I'm Susan Mernit. I'm a former tech executive. In 2013, I started developing a nonprofit called Hack the Hood that was a tech equity um, organization helping young people get careers and jobs in tech. I'm proud to say that it's still around and I'm now a board member. I went on to also be an executive director at The Crucible for 5 years. Then I retired-ish for a while, and now I work as a nonprofit development consultant. I love independent arts and media. I've worked with them on many projects and with many small nonprofits, and I was really happy to have a chance to do a workshop because I think that so many of you do such great work, and I know how under-resourced you are. So hopefully this will be really helpful. Personal fact, I also became obsessed with weightlifting. And in a few days on Saturday, I'm actually doing my first weightlifting competition. I will probably be 20 years older than the next person who's competing, but I don't care. I'm good for it. Thank you. Okay, so now a little bit about you. Let's try to keep some of this going here. Oh my goodness, I love when things just get all janky. Let's try to get back to the presentation. Nope, that's not what I wanted to show you. Okay, there we go. All right, so the thing that we didn't ask you to do besides introducing yourself is put in the chat, what's something you'd like to get out of today's webinar? I want to make sure if you have specific goals or questions that we cover them so your investment in this time is really well set. I want you to make sure you get what you need. Here's what we're going to do today. We're really going to talk about how improving your planning and also fine-tuning your presentation of the materials that you submit with a grant application can make your application so much stronger. I've been on multiple review panels, including ones for the CAC, the City of Oakland, and San Francisco. So I've both been an applicant and I've been a reviewer, which is part of why I thought this would be a good presentation for me to share my experience. I also know that some of you have experiences that you're going to share. So if you have learned experience that you want to share, I don't think I'm the only person here with expertise. So I'm hoping you will step up and contribute. We're going to talk about, how do you think like a reviewer? What are ways that you can do materials that get noticed with examples? Really careful to pick materials that were low budget. None of us have an agency we can hire to produce materials for us unless we win a grant. So everything is really in scale from what reality might look like. Some of the privacy and safety considerations, especially with today's federal climate and some of the things people are concerned about, and then some helpful planning tools. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. So I just want to talk about kind of the landscape we're operating in right now. I work with several small nonprofits as a consultant, mostly on fundraising and strategy. And, I think that I'm saying what you already know, that, applying for grants is more competitive than ever. Even for people who haven't been affected by federal funding, we find that a lot of funders in California are stepping back and reassessing. I'm seeing that particularly true with corporate foundations, but I'm also seeing it with family foundations. And there are some foundations that I know, including some family foundations, where they literally have stepped back and become very single focused. Like, we're going to spend all of our money this year on combating Trump's attacks and provide lawyers for people. So definitely it's both a shifting landscape and a very competitive one. And then knowing that so many of you are probably looking at or planning for the current calls from the California Arts Council, just also kind of want to name that in California, making sure that you're demonstrating that you have clear, measurable diversity inclusion practices is a criteria that perhaps is becoming more important. So I think that when you're looking at a competitive landscape and many organizations that have a lot of value, you really want to try to fine tune every aspect of your ask. So making sure that everything is well done and well thought through is really important. And also maybe being a little bit heavy-handed in emphasizing both your commitment to equity and the metrics you use to track that. And we're going to talk about metrics because especially as a small organization, data collection can be challenging. And I want to sort of talk about ways to think about that if it's something that you kind of want to supplement. So kind of looking at getting started. These are kind of the basics. So, this is the floor. If you're sloppy, you can lose the grant for that reason. So I think it's really essential, even if you're like a single person organization, to think about who's going to be your proofreader? Who's going to check your checklist to make sure that you actually are including everything that you said you would, that you need to submit to have a complete application? How are the formatting? How's the formatting looking on your PDFs? Are layouts for things easy to follow? Do the materials fit the formats requested? Are you sending PDFs or are you sending images? Really making sure that you just can check every single thing is kind of critical because you're going to have so many competitors who are going to do this right, even if their projects are less worthy than yours, or everyone's worthy, and this will become a distinguishing factor. So, and funders have a lot of organizations where they may be meeting for the first time in a review panel. They really look for credibility. They look for track record. They look for storytelling. And I know you guys have talked about storytelling. But in addition to the grant narrative, they're looking at these supplemental materials, not only around your professionalism, but around emotional resonance. So we're going to talk about some of the materials that you will probably be submitting and look at some best practice kind of examples. So, one of the things you want to do is make sure any work samples you have are really good. And whenever I say that, I always think, but don't cost a lot of money because we don't have a lot of money to spend on materials. And yet, how can we present good materials? So I wanted to show a couple of materials from this list that I thought were great. And I was just maybe look at them, and they're short, and then talk about like why they're good and what's effective about them. And obviously, welcome your thoughts and comments. Can we show the raw dance YouTube video?
Yes, let me get that queued up. Let's see. Okay. Give me 1 second to move all these things around.
While we're loading, I'll also say that trying to look at this as a year-round process versus something you do in the 3 weeks before a grant is due is really helpful because some of these things like work samples are things you can bank. You can be taking pictures on your phone, recording video, taking photos, pulling things from your social media and putting them somewhere and then pulling together some of these really what are essentially highlight reels.
All right. Do you guys see my screen? Wait. Okay.
Not
Everybody
yet.
see? Oh, not yet? You don't see anything yet?
I'm not seeing it. Can you
Okay.
guys see it? If you
Let's do it again. Everything is in the way as I'm trying to move things around. Okay, sorry about
let me try and do it just so we let's see what happens now.
be here. Okay, do you guys
Okay,
see
here
it?
we go.
Oh. I can move this around.
So this is 58 seconds long. It's not even a minute. That's their credibility right there. I love that you see audience in some of the shots. Okay, so some of the things about this that I think are really powerful are that they clearly shot throughout a period of time. They went back to their media assets and they cut this and put it together. I'm sure they did it in a low cost way with a basic editor, but it's got a really smart selection of images. It shows the dancers in many different settings, get a sense of both their work and where they perform. It has some shots with audience, so you get a sense of them interacting with people in space. It has what I thought was a very compelling pull quote from a respected newspaper. So that's reinforcing a positive view on the reviewer. And it's only a minute long. I don't have to watch this as a reviewer for 5 minutes waiting to extract what the value is. Sometimes it gets really tiresome when these videos go on and on because someone doesn't have the knowledge to edit them. Um, if you are someone who doesn't have these kind of editing skills, my recommendation is find a teenager. It's just incredible how young people have really assumed this as digital natives, at a level that someone my age like completely wouldn't have. Um, Want to show another video that I think is also really compelling. Um, to get out of this one. This is another one that is done in a similar fashion in that it's really filmed, I think, very affordably, but again, really tells the story of this organization in a way that made me feel like they were really effective. This one also is just a minute long. Oops, let's get that out of there. Okay, so I think one of the things I'd highlight with both of these is the intentionality of their knowing that they were going to be shooting they were going to be collecting over the course of many events and over perhaps 6 months or a year to do this. And even if you're not doing video, taking photos over time that can reflect is really, really helpful. So I just want to show one more, which is Hospitality House. And this is one where they didn't have video. It's art and they had a slideshow. And I think this is also extremely effective. So if you're thinking, well, I'm not a dance company, that's completely valid. And here what they did is they provided a series of slides where you could really see the artwork. And I think that, this is great because they're able to really talk about their work and show a range of the work. So, whether you are a performance company or you're something that's doing outreach and events, think about how to version these examples to what would work for you. But, that idea that you're collecting images over time, that you're putting them together in a really attractive and friendly way. I think those things just make a really big difference. And as a reviewer, when I see things like this, I feel like the person really cares about what they're doing because they put together a good presentation. It's not only that they have great work, they're taking the time to show me. And I love these scenes where you see audience. It's like, oh my God, I paid for this and people came to it. One of the fears that reviewers have is that you're paying for something that a very tiny community will reach. You're not funding something that actually has the broad reach to justify the cost. So throwing in those pictures of audience or people reacting to what you do if you can, even something like this, you see people working together. These really boost your credibility and really reassure really reassure people about their investment. So I think those are good things to think about. Um, any questions or comments just looking at these kinds of materials? You have like a yes, but that's a problem for me. I welcome that. Or how could you adapt this to what you do?
I'm checking the comments.
Great.
Nothing here as of yet.
Great. I'll show one more thing while we're looking, which is the idea of testimonials. And again, you know, you should use your judgment about both what's required and what you're invited to present. So this is a medley. You may not be showing every one of these, but I also thought that, it's great to have like, pictures and stories. And if we do this, we want to do it in a way that's not poverty pimping, that's appropriate and respectful to the people we're serving. So I'm going to take it as a given that you know how to do that. But finding an appropriate way to tell reviewers about how your work has impact or how your work is appreciated is also something that reviewers care about, that they're going to be impressed with. So this is a little bit different. It's not a performing arts organization, but I think the sincerity in these posts is really helpful. If you're somebody who is funding teaching artists, thinking about parents talking about the impact on their children, or artists who've been in your classes thinking about the impact, those could be analogous things to think about. And then media coverage, if you are written up, getting copies of the clips and including them is always a super powerful thing to do. So, I'm hoping that you're thinking about what your materials are and what could work for you, and like how you could improve them as you're looking at this, and kind of, what can you do to tweak what you have before you put in work samples. I think for an arts organization, the creative work samples are extremely, extremely important. But they're also going to be looking at your competency overall. And if you have well-prepared lists and data, that's going to also enhance your credibility. So unless you want me to, I'm not going to spend as much time looking at these because they're drier. But, these are public examples of well-done materials. So Californians for the Arts has a really well-formatted, clear look at, who's on their board. And this is an example of just having it look credible will make you look good. You're fiscally sponsored, you may have a steering committee or an advisory council versus a formal board, but who are those people who are your oversight, or who are those people that help you make decisions? Having them in a credible, well-formatted list is going to make you look more professional and more prepared, even if you're a 1 or 2 person organization. Demographics. This is a tough one. I'm always working with organizations that are asked to submit really detailed demographics that they don't necessarily measure. How many of you have experienced that problem of being asked for demographic data that maybe you don't actually collect? Anybody have that experience? This is a really good civic arts survey, but part of what I also like about it, it's a reminder that you can pick representative data. So you don't want to pretend that, oh, I'm checking all the data. Here's some data from someone else I'm saying is mine. But I'm based in Oakland, and I often find that we're looking at like Oakland Unified School District data. When we talk about kids in a school, we don't necessarily ask all of the children that we're serving their ethnicity. That would be extremely intrusive. But we can look at a school and say, well, the children in this school or this neighborhood typically have this ethnic makeup, and we are serving people representative of that. So making sure that you tell the funder where you're getting your data from is a good practice, but realizing that you may have data that's placeholder data that's actually relatively accurate is also something to think about. If you're serving an audience that goes beyond a neighborhood, it's more complicated. But I think that thinking about, what data sources do I have to help me tell the best story when you put together demographics is a great exercise. Because if you can meet this request, it is better than saying, I don't have this data unless you have a reason of your own to not want to share it, in which case, I respect that. And then I know you're spending some time on project budget separately, but I'm always interested in what budgets look like. So these are two sample budgets that you can just refer to. And again, I'm not going to spend time on them now unless you want me to, but they'll be good references for later. So just kind of going back to this sense of impact, um, looking at all these materials, I'm curious about what they make you think about your own work and your own applications. Um, I think that, everything we're looking at, the people putting these applications together, they've given these things a lot of thought and they've really worked to perfect them. And I know that takes time and we never have enough time. But I would love to sort of talk about them and get some of, what are your thoughts and feelings about what you're looking at? How did it work? Uh, Nicholas asked, was there audio in the videos you shared? They had soundtracks. So these particular ones had soundtracks that were overlaid. If you're doing performing arts like theater, you're going to be slicing it together and you're going to have to decide where you have audio that goes with the video and where you didn't. I'm sorry that you couldn't hear the audio. The audio is great. Definitely go back and play them with the audio. Not sure why that happened.
I can add the videos to the chat too, but they're also going to be
Yeah.
connected or attached to the presentation that will be given out after this workshop. But I'm going to put the links in the chat. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So yeah, but this is a good question in a sense of like, do you have to overlay music or do you want to include it? You have the option to do both depending on what you want to present. But both of these really were highlight reels where there was ongoing music over the visuals. And I thought that was great because it meant they were easier to produce. They're very rich and compelling, but they're not actually complex in terms of how you make them. And I think when you're a small organization, unless your profession is multimedia, having that ease of creation is really, really important. And I think if you can manage to, have a level of competency across a range of materials, well edited, well proofed application materials, compelling photos or video, some testimonials or media links, well formatted board lists, well done budgets. When you kind of hit every one of those points, reviewers are impressed. They're like, oh, these people are thorough and competent. Great. I'm going to give them money. It's going to be a good investment. And that's really what a lot of reviewers fear, that they're being asked to fund so many organizations. They can't fund all of them. And how can they make sure that you're actually going to do what you say you're going to do? Well, obviously, you've been doing it for 10 years. That's a factor. But what if they are concerned that maybe you're doing something, the same thing for 10 years? The other point here I'd make is when I see people putting materials from 4 years ago as their current work samples, I downgrade them. If your materials are not fresh, I downgrade you. Why are you getting grant money, but not taking the trouble to upgrade your materials and actually show the current work that was being funded? That makes me feel both frustrated and a little suspicious. So when I see new work, even if it's photographs, I'm like, great, they're actually chronicling what they're doing right now, and they're showing that to me. So I think that I'm not alone as a reviewer in wanting materials to feel relevant, competent, but also fresh. And reviewing your own work before you go into this CAC application cycle around freshness. I think the deadline for some of these grants is October. You have time to, you know, think about, what do I need to upgrade? What can I sharpen? How do I reintegrate? Because that can add so much to your application when you are able to do that. And that really comes to kind of another core part of this presentation, which is, how do you do a lot with a little? As someone who has always worked with small organizations, loves working with small organizations, but knows how endlessly challenging it is, I've become a really avid planner. And I think about things over the course of 6 months or a year, really from the perspective of how can I reuse things? How can I plan ahead? How can I anticipate what I'm going to need? And how do I manage that? So I built you this tool that's kind of similar to one of the things I use, which is a planning matrix. And we'll make this available to you with the presentation as something that you can copy and download and use yourself if you want to. And, I'm like a big project management person. I find that it's just really intense to have a lot to do and not have enough time to do it. So having something like this is really helpful. And with the way what I do, it's like, what's the item I need to include for specific grant? And I might take this tab and say like CIC grant or, Oakland or Rainin or whatever. But it's like, what are the materials you have to create? What do you already have? What's the status of what you have? What do you need? Who else is working with you? If you're a two-person organization, it might be you and a partner. If you're bigger, you might have multiple roles. Once I have a link to where it's going to live in my Google Drive, I put that link in. I look at the status of that thing. So like, is it in progress? Is it completed? I look at the deadline when I need to have it by. And I love the submitted box because that helps me not forget. I don't want to leave something out by accident because I'm so tired or I'm so stressed. And I actually did that that one time where we did not get a grant because I left something important off. And I never did that again. In fact, I think I built my first list like that after that. And when grants have their own checklists, I'll also use the grant checklist. But I like this because it helps me keep track of all of my internal materials. So it's like, do I have a fiscal sponsor letter? Do I have a project budget? Do I need an organization budget? How about that board member list? Something that happens to me a lot as a consultant is I get these materials and I discover they're 2 or 3 years out of date. I can't really submit a board list from 2022. I need a board list from 2025. So it's like, oops, somebody has to update that list. So this also helps you flesh out ahead of time, where do you need updates? Where do you need tweaks? Where are things lacking? So you're not like 4 days out from your deadline, and you're like, oh my God, there are like 4 things that all have to be redone. So I love stuff like this because it helps me anticipate. Sometimes they want a staff member list. Again, I don't keep those lying around, do you? So thinking about like what that would look like, having maybe a set of core bios of people that you anticipate so you can actually pull it together. These can be like huge time savers if you start working on them a little bit earlier. Sometimes the demographics can get very intrusive. They want to know about the sexual, racial, gender makeup of like every part of your organization. I tend to resent those, and because I want the funding, I do them anyway. Again, if you have to do them, they can be labor intensive. So understanding like what you want to collect. I keep a lot of this stuff in files for my clients, like a frequently asked questions file with a list of demographics. So when we're working on a grant, we have it prepped. It's really helpful. And then we update it like once a year. And then video. Here's that example. What you have is from 2022. I need more recent video. Do I have to go back to the program manager and be like, hey, did you take anything on your phone? Can we have it? We need to integrate it. Same thing. You know, if you're collecting images, is your organization storing them in a Dropbox folder, or are they in a Google Drive? Are you someone who still uses Flickr? Is there another photo app? Making sure that you know where those images are, how to get the right copies, who's going to work with you. You know, these are not things you want to do like 24 hours before the grant is due, unless you want to have like a really high stress experience. Client testimonials, another one. Collecting them when a program ends, knowing you're going to need them, is a lot easier than like 4 months later being like, hey, could you find a parent for me? Could you find a student? Wow, they're all back in school, and that was a summer program. What do I do now? You know, so again, like using a list like this to think about like, what am I asking for funding for? How do I start to get the materials I need? And how do I do it without having to be in a giant rush? How can I just add it to my work plan over a period of time? If you don't have that, you certainly want to push to get it done. But if you can anticipate it, it will take some of the stress out. So, how many of you have some kind of worksheet like this that you're already using? Do you have any kind of like planning tools that are helpful for you?
Uh,
Yeah,
Please unmute yourself if you guys want to jump in and answer any questions. I'm also putting the questions in the chat as well.
yeah, I'm a big Google Drive user. I really like Google Drive because it creates a collaborative shared space. I like storing photos in Dropbox for the same reason. You can give permissions to people at different levels. So it also becomes not having to chase people as much. If you're putting a lot of materials into a Google Drive folder, into a Dropbox, you don't have to chase people as much to retrieve them. A lot of people use Vimeo as a place to upload videos and keep them private. People can also do that with YouTube, and then you can decide what you're going to upload or share publicly. Or, as you probably know, for a work sample, you can have a link that's public only to people who have the link. So you could make your work sample available to everyone, or you could make it only viewable to people with the link. And then for me as a reviewer, I would be seeing it, but you know, your neighbor might not be like coming across it. What platforms of software do you use to track your process? So I'm recommending Google Drive as a really great all-purpose tool. Um, People use project management tools as well. I'm wondering what folks here, how do you keep track of what you have to do? Do you make a list? Um, you can also take a list like this and transfer it to paper or print it out and use it if you're someone who doesn't like to work digitally on a computer. This can adjust to a notebook form. So if you're someone who's more like, well, I want to write it down, you can totally do that as well. I just find from my experience that tracking makes it so much easier. Finding some way to track just makes it so much simpler. Um, I like this better than like Trello, Asana, a lot of the digital platforms, because it just feels more straightforward. I'm someone who likes to use as few tools as possible. So having to have like a separate project management tool can feel like a lot. Yep, Google Drive, Calendar, Tasks, and Sheets, some of my favorites too. Um, Brett, do you have any techniques that have really helped you in terms of like how you use tasks or how you use all these things together? I think people are struggling with how to like improve their process, right?
Okay, well, I do make my own matrices, just like what I see right here. I do tend to put them into columns and rows, very similarly to you. However, you do have a deadline in here, but I color code them across the line so that I know what's in progress, what's been done, what needs to be done, so I can just look right at it and be able to tell. And then as far as calendar goes, that keeps me really up to date with deadlines because I'm somebody who could let a deadline miss or wait a minute, the deadline's in 45 minutes. So that's what I do.
I love that. I hadn't planned to share this, but since we're clearly soulmates, I'm going to. My Google Calendar is completely color coded. So I have all these different colors that mean different things, and red are my deadlines. And I got really screwed on my estimated taxes this year. So I'm now terrified. So now I have all the tax deadlines a month ahead of time in red because I'm so paranoid. But I agree that like using your calendar can be really effective if you have a lot of different things that you're trying to take care of. What do you guys do? Anybody else want to share about things that work for them in terms of just tracking these like multiple things you have to manage? Yeah.
I'm still I'm still in the world of I have to write everything down and I make, lists and then I do use pens to like, circle and make sure that I
Yeah,
know which ones
yeah,
are important
yeah.
and I do the multiple layers of kind of check marks and I like digital, but it's much better for me if like it's right in front of me. I don't have to go to it. It's just literally hands-on right in front of me because I've got multiple different kinds of projects happening all at the same time. So that's me.
Yeah, I'm a notebook addict. I love notebooks and I love making notes, and I used to do everything in a notebook, and then one year I had six notebooks, one for each project. And it was like a nightmare because if I couldn't find one of the notebooks, I was like, wait, where's the notebook for that project? And that's when I really switched to doing more digitally because I just was like, I can't, if I keep it all in the same notebook, it's too hard to keep track of. But I don't want to have all these little notebooks. But notebooks are very satisfying. You know, we are people who are tactile, who like to write things down. Ralph, anything you want to share about either your process or none of these things would ever work for me? This is what I like to do.
I think I got it right here. No, I was having some trouble putting in the messages, but I figured that part out. Um, I am just so impressed that you guys are so organized. That's amazing to me. But no, I just have always used the shoebox method, throw everything, pictures, everything, even though 90% of it probably I could never use. And then I have to go through the arduous task of sifting through everything and finding something that works and doesn't. And because I'm not good at this kind of thing. It's like that, and I don't know how many artists are, but I'm seeing here that, oh my goodness, there are a lot that have that skill set that I just don't possess. But it's daunting during this time, this season of grants. But I see a lot of things that you are saying that I really should be doing, and
Well,
probably could have saved me a lot of time. Thank you for
well,
that.
I have to say, I will confess, I'm a person who's driven by fear. It's like a lot of the proactive things I do because I'm so afraid of the things that will happen if I don't do them. So, all this planning is really about avoiding being like a complete wreck, like for 3 days before a major grant opportunity. It's all about like wanting to like try to anticipate what problems are and dial back my stress. And that's really a huge motivator for me for getting on top of things. And if you
Yeah,
are more paper driven and you're not a digital person, I would even say like take your shoebox and make 6 envelopes. Like I have an envelope for images, an envelope for notes, an envelope, because you just have, I mean, what I find is so intimidating is when you have so much stuff and you're on this deadline with all this pressure, you have to organize it. It
yeah.
makes my head hurt. So
And when
when
I
I,
say shoebox, I mean like, files, video,
yeah,
files of everything.
yeah,
And sometimes I have, 200 images to look through, because I have, people that come in and they send me pictures and everything goes in. Okay, because who knows, I might need something. And that's
yeah,
the only thing I have to be careful of. And I don't know if everyone else has the same experience, but I can sometimes become the victim of my own organization where I can get more concerned about the structure of my calendar than actually benefiting from the calendar. And so
yeah,
I got to be real careful of that kind of thing too, because I can get a little OCD about that. But anyway,
yeah,
that's my
yeah.
experience.
Does anybody else want to share? We're all getting very real here. Anybody else want to chime in? And let's go back to the presentation. So, planning matrix or whatever version of that works for you, highly recommend. And then, for CAC, the really obvious thing, but I felt like I had to say it, download the grant guidelines. They have this PDF. You can print it out or read it, on your screen, but actually making the time to read it is a really good practice. You just want to make sure that there's not something that you're missing that would inadvertently disqualify you. The time when I forgot to upload something, I disqualified us. And thank God it was the ED, so nobody could fire me. And it was, it was kind of like a teachable moment for my staff, like, I screwed up. I'm really sorry. But I was so shocked when we didn't get it because we'd gotten like 3 before. And I was even more shocked when I discovered it was my fault. So, you don't want to be me and have that happen to you. So I'd say just, being paranoid is really worth it. I also want to talk a little bit about photos and video. And this is where the note about privacy really comes in. We're in a time right now when a lot of people are feeling very uncomfortable about filming people at demonstrations. They're afraid that photos are going to be scanned and people are going to be identified and gone after. I think if you're working in the arts or in nonprofits, it's also worth being aware of those cautions that people have. So, following rules about obtaining consent, thinking about, who you're photographing and do you have their permission? Um, thinking about, shooting audiences in a way that may not show people's faces, if you think that's a safety factor, are things that any reviewer or any human being is going to respect right now. We don't want to make other people more vulnerable at our expense. I also think that being overly perfectionistic about tools can be really harmful. Um, Making sure you have a cell phone that can take good images and that you know how to operate the video is really helpful. Again, if you need help, find a teenager. I'm endlessly amazed at how technically talented, 14 to 18-year-olds are, and I've learned a lot from them. It is legal to blur or crop things in the editing process. I have a tool on my phone I didn't mention in this list, but I like called Snapseed. I paid $3 for it. Helps me edit photos, Google Photos also has editing capacity. My phone has editing capacity. Apple and Samsung, Android all have that. And I wanted to share two resources that I think are really good. I love Canva, not a very good Canva user. So I'm not a power user, but this will give you pre-set up templates and designs that you can work with. I always want to invest more time to get better at it. I haven't done it yet, but I have colleagues who are so proficient with it. And it has all kinds of free options, which I always think is great. And then video CapCut is an editing tool that people really like that can just really simplify the editing process, especially with the kind of videos that we're talking about. And I would just say, if you have other tools that you use, since we're talking about tips and resources, please put them in the chat so that if you have something you like, whether it's a Apple tool, Google tool, Android tool, or it's a tool that's from a third party, we can sort of learn a little bit from you about things that work for you. To keep going while you do that. We're also in the age of influence. Book authors get asked all the time, while you're submitting this manuscript, how many followers do you have on social media? Grant reviewers are kind of the same. My last panel experience, the organization said, do not look at anything at the materials we give you. Do not look at people's social media. Do not look at their YouTube. Only look at what we give you. I thought that was a brilliant comment because I think we do look at what people have and then we judge. And organizations that have a lot of reviews, a lot of quotes, a lot of press hits, they get more credibility. So one way you can preempt that is to make your own little press kit. Using Google Drive, start to think about, what are things you'd share as like your social proof. If you're able to upload supplementary materials that are PDFs, what's in them? What do they look like? Right? This is your chance to make a little press packet without having to spend a lot of money. That can be very effective because the reviewer is in this isolated world paging through your materials, and it's a chance for you to improve the impression you're making. I like both these examples that I picked, and part of what I like about them is they're not super complicated. I'm always suspicious when they're so fancy because I don't have the resources to be that fancy. I like it when it's pretty straightforward. So here, they're sharing their pictures from their public artwork. And this is a very significant organization that has a long history and does have money. But these are really simple images and photos. And I think that, thinking about that idea of like, not how do I do a great job, but how to do a good job is a great way to think about it. How do you just do a good job? And doing a good job is better than doing no job. So like here, they have their message, their tagline, their mission, their story. And, you get a feeling for like what you're going to look at. They've got things about their mission. They've built kind of a multi-stage thing. They have photos. This is a great use of photography just to give some flavor. So, when you're thinking about Ralph, those like 200 photos, that's going to be thinking about, well, what would I put in some kind of more static press kit versus what would I upload as work samples? And you could choose to do both. So I like these because it does take time to make, but they're not technologically complicated. They're pretty straightforward. This is all WordPress. And they're getting more space. And you could easily turn this into a PDF just by printing the pages. And here they've embedded a video in this particular one. So you also could have bonus material outside of your work samples in your press kit. Maybe this is the place to put that incredible presentation from 2022. Maybe it doesn't belong in your current work, it belongs in your press kit. So those are things just to think about as you're trying to like build your social proof and improve your story. Just a couple of things. And if you are an IAM grantee, this may not be as relevant, but there's also a lot of rules for the CAC about fiscal sponsorship. And they want to know, you know, who is your fiscal sponsor? Do you have a signed letter you can show them? Does your fiscal sponsor meet their guidelines? If you're with independent arts and media, you don't have these problems, but they actually want a certain amount of time. So if you had a different fiscal sponsor, making sure you actually qualify, these are all just things to prep ahead of time. So, now's the part where we get to talk to each other again if we want to. And, I'm just wondering, like, when you're preparing these kind of applications, what's one thing that you struggle with around documentation or creating visibility? And then kind of on the flip side, what are some things that work well for you or best practices that you could share with other people where it's like, well, I figured out how to do this and that seems to work. So let's just kind of talk to each other a little bit as practitioners who all are getting ready for grant season, as you said. And, what are some of the challenges or what are some best practices you could share? What's the worst thing you have to do to get ready for your next application? The thing you do not want to do that will be the most onerous. Is it the budget? I always hate the budget.
I hate the searching part. Looking for all of the, it's like you're going through, thousands of different possibilities and you realize you're only qualified for, a couple of them. And then from there, you have to find out, okay, have they changed their requirements from before? And one thing I'm afraid of is that I don't want to adjust our program to fit them. I want them to be able to do, to fund what we actually do so that I'm not creating this monster of a program that wasn't intended to be. So I have to be real careful with that. At least for me, that's been an issue.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're raising a really great point, which is, one best practice people talk about all the time is like, be true to who you are and what you want. Don't twist your program and your mission to fit what you think the funder wants because it becomes unsustainable. So, Brett, doing this for the first time, just trying to very simply tell the story of like what you do, what the impact is going to be if you get the money to do it, who you're going to do it for, how you're going to do it, and how are you going to measure it to know if it worked. And those are really the core elements of any grant application. People may want to know who you're going to do it with, who's your team, who's your staff. They may want to know where you're going to do it. They're certainly going to want to know how much it's going to cost to do it. That's your budget. But really, you're telling a story. And if you're doing it for the first time, you're really talking out of vision and creativity, but you have to also sound like it's executable. People who are like, if I had $5 million, I could do X. It's like, great. What could you do with 20? Thinking about scaling your vision to match the scope of the money you could start with is also a really good tactic because starting something small and growing it is how many, many things start. And funders are more likely to give you a smaller investment if you're new than take a risk on you when they don't know you don't have a track record. So thinking about like what's the first step, the micro bite, is really another good strategy because having something that feels too big when you don't have any track record can be a way that people disqualify you because honestly, most funders are not risk takers. They're like venture capitalists. They want to go for the tried and true thing. They don't want to get in trouble. And then the funders who are like, we're going to fund something new and innovative that never's been done before. Brett, if you can find those people, it'll be great. I actually had the honor of winning a Google Impact Challenge for $500,000 in 2014 for a project that only served 18 kids. But it was so extraordinary because how many funders would do that, right? Like, that doesn't happen anymore. So comments or questions? Angelica, we haven't heard from you. I don't know if you have anything that you want to share or ask. But the goal here is to make sure that you're getting tools to help you in preparing all these materials. We're going to go with your application. So if there are things that I haven't answered or we haven't helped each other with, please feel free to bring them into the discussion. Okay,
I
a little
think
more.
that
Please go ahead.
I think that a lot of the arduous work is around the requirements for grants and filling out the applications. It's money that's been allocated for artists by foundations or governments, but they don't want to just give the money to the artists. So then they hire these management companies to make up the process for applying for it. And it's not realistic.
Yeah.
And you have to make up a project in order to get funding. Or as you're an artist, you just need time and space in order to make your art. I don't need to come up with this project idea, and I don't need to attach myself to a nonprofit in order to qualify for money.
That is a completely valid and spot on observation. I feel you, and I think that something you're saying that I'm going to elevate, because I think a lot of us feel it if we've been in this world for a while, is it becomes a game. You're trying to do work, and you're really being judged on your ability to play this game, and what is the relationship between the game and your work. So that can be very frustrating, and yet they have the money and you don't. So how do you get it? Not a healthy dynamic. Another dynamic I'll highlight as being frustrating is ignoring true cost. I've written a lot of grants where people only want to pay for program costs. I will pay for you to teach children how to draw, but for you to pay the payroll clerk who writes the checks for those artists, no, I'm not doing that. That's your problem. And, I think that one of the big pushes in the past couple of years is like, let's make funders pay for true costs, living wages, paying for everything it takes to operate the organization, not one little sliver of it. People are patting themselves on the back because they're paying the teaching artist, but they don't want to pay to support the rest of the organization. Well, how are those people going to pay their rent? I think there's a lot of dynamics, one of which you named, Angelica, about how nonprofits could do better. And I just want to acknowledge how frustrating that can be, because it's real. And going back to the materials in the workshop, acknowledging that, I do think that if you are going to play this game and you are going to try to get the funding for your work, taking time to play it to the best of your ability and capacity, is a smart move. And typically with many of these funders, once you've been funded, you build a track record. And while the work you're being asked to do is time consuming every year, your odds of getting refunded, are not small if you can meet the requirements. Having said that, it also can be extremely aggravating. So I want to be real in both. So that's kind of the end of the formal presentation. I'm happy to stick around and talk and answer questions. I'm one of these people who posts a lot on LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter.